put us on a terrible dark track that we still live on today. It's impossible to look at the events of the Spanish conquest of Mexico, despite the brutality, without feeling some respect for men like Cortez. These were men of steel. He arrived in Mexico with 490 men in 11 ships. They'd sailed from Cuba. And initially, he couldn't, of course, speak any of the local languages, and he was confronting gigantic forces. In the first big battle that he faced, which was actually against the Maya, not against the Aztecs, he had his 490 men. They confronted an army of 40,000 men, and they defeated them. Now, they defeated them for a number of reasons. One was that the Spanish had cavalry, and the horse had been extinct in the Americas for 12,000 years. The Maya and later the Aztecs simply couldn't grasp at first what cavalry was. It seemed like supernatural beings to them, a creature. They described it as part deer, part man. And the men and the horses they sit upon are armored in steel. And you have to envisage what it feels like to have never faced a cavalry charge, and to see this group of heavy horse thundering towards you so that the ground is shaking beneath your feet, so that the earth is pounded up into dust, and they're coming at you at 30 miles an hour, bearing down on you, and you have no tactics whatsoever to deal with this because you've never faced a cavalry charge before. Secondly, the Spanish, they were incredibly brutal, the Spanish. There are no heroes in this story. There are heroes in my stories, but they're neither the Spanish nor the Aztecs. They're individuals whose lives play out through the story. The Spanish used dogs of war. They used wolfhounds and mastiffs, which were trained to relish human flesh, and they armored them in steel and set them loose upon the enemy.
Can I just think, all they had before that, they had chihuahuas.
They had chihuahuas. That was it. They did have dogs, but they were chihuahuas. So these things, these monstrous creatures, they thought they were dragons. They couldn't understand what they were, that come leaping at them and tearing huge holes in their ranks, into which the Spanish pikemen and swordsmen then enter and create further havoc. And also the Spanish had guns. They had cannon, they had muskets. So all of these, despite their small numbers, did give them an advantage, undoubtedly. And secondly, and another thing, and it's an important part of my story, is Cortez was a Machiavellian player. He understood psychology. He knew he was up against something gigantic. The Maya were a substantial force in their own right. He routed them at the Battle of Potonchan in 1519, but really his target was the Aztecs, because the Aztecs had the gold. And the Aztecs were an enormous force, and they were an organized military power. They had 200,000 men that they could put under arms. And when the Aztecs caught you, because that was their objective on the battlefield, was to catch you, not to kill you, when they caught you, you became their prisoner, you were fattened in a special holding pen, and then you were sacrificed. You were marched up the pyramid and your heart was cut out. They were absolutely terrifying, murderous civilization. I don't whitewash the Aztecs at all, and I refuse to go into this historical revisionism that tries to see them as good guys. They were awful. They did terrible, terrible things, and that's one of the reasons they lost against Cortez, despite their overwhelming numbers, because the Aztecs preyed upon their neighbors. They preyed upon the Totonacs. They preyed upon the Tlaxcalans and used them as farms for human sacrifice, by using their overwhelming military power to just take young men and young women from those societies and kill them in the most ghastly way. Naturally, when the Totonacs and the Tlaxcalans saw Cortez coming, it presented an interesting situation for them. The Totonacs immediately joined Cortez. One of the interesting features of the story I tell is what happened with the Tlaxcalans. They were the hereditary enemies of the Aztecs. They had been preyed upon by the Aztecs for 200 years. But Xicotenca, their battle king, was a man of enormous principle. And when he saw Cortez, of course the elders of his society said, "You must join with Cortez immediately and overthrow our enemies, the Aztecs." Xicotenca said, "No, I'm not going to do that." What he saw, he was very far-sighted, and he saw that Cortez represented the doom of all the civilizations of the Americas, and that he had a responsibility to fight him, even though it was in his interest not to. And he did fight Cortez, and he fought him tooth and nail, and I tell this story in volume 2 of War God's series, The Return of the Plumed Serpent, which is published now. He fought him tooth and nail until Cortez, by practicing terrorism by destroying whole villages, by burning people at the stake, throwing people into pits of sharpened stakes. That he so terrified the elders of Tlaxcala that they forced Xicotenca to make peace with him, and then Xicotenca joined Cortez and carried on in the conflict against the Aztecs. If the Aztecs had been generous, loving, positive people, Cortez would have had no local allies, and Cortez would have been crushed before he even left the beach. But because the Aztecs were so cruel to their neighbors, they reaped the karma that comes from that, and that was that Cortez, with his 490 men, soon found himself with hundreds of thousands of local auxiliaries who were fighting on his side. The other thing about Cortez that I need to tell you concerns a woman, and her name is Malinal, and she's a historical figure, and she's a key character in my story. In fact, two women are key in my war god story. One of them is a young witch called Tozi, who has supernatural powers. She's just growing into those powers at the beginning of the story, but she becomes more powerful as the story goes on. And another is a genuine historical figure. There were many witches in that society, and it's interesting. I've studied the accounts of them and put that to work in my story. But Malinal is a genuine historical figure, a renowned historical figure, as a matter of fact. She was given to Cortez as a prisoner when he defeated the Maya at the Battle of Potonchan. Amongst their gifts that they gave him as a sign of their surrender was 20 women, and amongst those 20 women was Malinal. Now, up till that point, Cortez had been able to talk to the Maya because there was a Spaniard who'd been shipwrecked in the Yucatan, been there for 11 years, and Cortez grabbed him and used him as a translator to speak to the Maya. But he had no way of speaking to the Aztecs. After he moved on from the Tabasco River and had his first encounters with the Aztecs, he suddenly found he couldn't communicate with them, and he used the power of words very, very effectively. He played upon the superstitions and the fears of those he confronted, and he was nonplussed at being unable to speak to the Aztecs. His Spaniard, who spoke Maya, couldn't speak a word of Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, and that's when Malinal thrust herself forward. She appears on the stage of history, and she lets Cortez know in no mistakable terms, she speaks both Nahuatl and Maya. She can work with Aguilar, that shipwrecked Spaniard. If he will put Cortez's words into the Mayan language, she will then put them into the Nahuatl language, and thus they will communicate with the Aztec ambassadors, and so on in the reverse. Pretty soon, she's dispensed with Aguilar. She's learned the Spanish language. She learns it in weeks. She's an incredibly brilliant woman, and she stands by Cortez's side. And what intrigued me about her, and what I'm able to do in fiction, is to give her a motive for that, because Cortez admitted that aside from God himself, it was Malinal who gave me this conquest of Mexico. She gave him the psychology of Moctezuma, and it was clear to me that she had a huge grudge against Moctezuma, and that right from the beginning, without any doubt whatsoever, she was determined to use Cortez as her instrument to overthrow the Aztecs. And that's also the story that I tell in War God, of this remarkable woman, who is, a woman that has a bad name in Mexico today, because she's seen as somebody who handed over the land to the conquerors. I see her very differently. I see that she saw the wickedness and evil of Moctezuma and had confronted it face to face, and was determined to bring him down. Initially, she did not fully realize what the consequences of that would be. The Spanish conquest of Mexico was a disastrous event for the Americas. It set in train the next conquest, the conquest of Peru, and following on from that, the whole slaughter of Native Americans in North America as well. All of this was built on the events of the Spanish conquest.
Are these, anytime I speak to my South American friends, and I start mentioning these names, they're like, how do you know that? Well, explain Graham Hancock books, and especially they say Malinar in a different way.
She's often called La Malinche.
Malinche, that's
La
what it is.
Malinche, that's the name that she's frequently known by, but her actual name was Malinal. She is a really fascinating, absolutely fascinating character, and it's been really interesting for me to explore her as a character and as a person, and to see the dilemmas that she goes that she goes through, and the role and the part that she plays, and her courage. This was a woman of enormous courage who was often in the midst of gigantic battles, at risk of her life every minute of the day, as these battles proceeded, and never flinched and never backed down. And something amazing that she did. In Aztec society, it was death to look Moctezuma in the eye. You had to lower your eyes when you talked to him. When the first encounter takes place between Cortez and Moctezuma, it takes place on one of the causeways leading into Tenochtitlan, the capital city of the Aztecs, which is Mexico City today. It was then in the middle of a lake. The accounts that the Aztecs give of it are stunned at the way Malinal behaves, because she looks Cortez straight in the eye. She will not lower her eyes.
Moctezuma.
She looks Moctezuma straight in the eye. Cortez is at her side. She gives the word of Cortez, and she doesn't cast her eyes down. She stares Moctezuma down so that he casts his eyes down. And that's when I knew this woman had a motive. There was something that happened to her, something in the background that history doesn't tell us about her and Moctezuma. And I'm able to explore that in a novel in a way that I wouldn't be able to do in a non-fiction book.
And we're learning, I mean, these are a lot of facts.
Many facts.
But you wrap it into a story, which makes it even more entertaining.
Thank you.
Like, it makes me, and in Latin America, a lot of times they wrap up facts into stories, and that's how you learn.
Yeah.
So
it's really important. This is I've been writing for my living for 30 plus years. It's very different writing a novel from writing non-fiction. In a novel, what is crucial is the characters and the people. If the reader doesn't identify and take an interest in the characters and the people, you've lost it right there as a novelist. You cannot just relay endless facts. It's not good. Go write a non-fiction book if you want to do that. Novels are about people. They're about the interactions of characters. They're about plot as well. All of that is central, and my objective has been to write fast-moving, engaging stories with characters that the reader can identify with, but at the same time to draw on my knowledge of the region and the research that I've done. I've traveled the whole route of Cortez in Mexico in order to bring the story to life with a realistic local context. So Volume 1 was published in 2013. It's available now. Volume 2 is also available now. They're available on Amazon, and I'll extend to your viewers the same offer that I extended on Joe Rogan and to others, but it does involve taking this offer up by about the 17th or 18th of October, and that is if you buy War God 1 or 2 or both of them on Amazon, go to my website, grahamhancock.com. Go to the War God page. You can't miss it. The War God cover is on the front page of the site, and you'll see a whole series, first of all, of chapters to read free online. I'm not asking people to buy this sight unseen. You can decide whether this is something for you or not. And secondly, links to the book on Amazon US, Amazon in the UK, Amazon in Canada, and so on and so forth, both in the Kindle edition and in the print editions. Write to me at the email address I give at the bottom of that page. Give me proof of purchase, give me your postal address, and I will send you what is called a book plate, a signed dedicated book plate. Obviously I can't sign the books themselves because they're coming to you direct from Amazon, but once I get back to England in November, I will sit down for a couple of weeks and sign and dedicate these book plates and send them out by airmail at my own expense to those who have bought the books so that they can place them inside. A book plate's just a fancy name for a label, really, but signed and dedicated personally by me. And what I won't be able to do, unfortunately, I did do this with Volume 1, but I'm under such pressure of work now. I have a huge non-fiction book to finish. I won't be able to get into personal correspondence, but I will fulfill this promise. The book plate will come to you through the post if you write to me, and crucially, give me your postal address.
It's